Assalamu alaikum. This is Adil Ahmad back with you again for the second episode of the weekend storytelling session. And we are persisting with a gentleman in Moscow, having dedicated the first episode to Mr. Mishka, Mikhail Fyodorovich Mindich, aka Mishka. मिश्का साहब जो हैं वो काउंट अलेक्जेंडर एलिएच रोस्टोव हु इज द सेंट्रल कैरेक्टर ऑफ दिस बुक उसके ये यूनिवर्सिटी बड़ी हैं एंड उनके साथ बड़ी अच्छी इनकी चलती है एंड ऑल्दो दे कम फ्रॉम अपोजिंग एंड्स ऑफ द सोशल स्पेक्ट्रम रोस्टोव बीइंग अ काउंट एन एरिस्टोक्रेट एंड मिश्का मंडिच being a part of the proletariat and a leading member of the revolution once it takes place. तो रोस्टोव साहब को जेल हो जाती है. But tribunal finds him guilty of wasting his time as a member of the leisure class, and he is very fortunate to not have been stood against the wall and been made the subject of a firing squad. Because in 1905 वो एक revolution हुआ था which failed. So in the aftermath of that, the proletariat, the Bolsheviks were, terribly suppressed. तो उस ज़माने में मिश्का साहब ने एक poem लिखी थी. But he didn't have the guts to publish it under his name because he feared that the Tsar's chelas would, do him in. But Count Rostov, being the straightforward man that he was, brave warrior, he says, नहीं यार तुमने बात सही लिखी है जो भी लिखी है. उसने बेसिकली एक पोएम लिखी थी जिसका मैंने पिछले बार भी जिक्र किया था और वो पोएम का नाम था वेयर इज इट नाउ. कि ये जो आप बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं ये लेजर क्लास वाले एरिस्टोक्रेट्स बड़े बड़े ख्वाब देखते हैं कि भाई व्हाट गुड इज इट जब तुम्हारा अवाम जो है वो पिस गया है, उसमें गुर्बत है, हंगरी भूख से जो है बेताब है. सो वेयर इज ऑल ऑफ दैट? वेयर इज योर टॉक? व्हाई आरंट यू वॉकिंग इट? सो अब ये रोस्टोव साहब got away with it because he was like a strong firm pillar of the aristocracy. And उस वक्त की, as I mentioned, the Russian aristocracy was evolved enough to take criticism from one of their own. So although the poem had been written by Mishka, but because Mishka was not brave enough to put his name to it, तो वो रोस्टोव के नाम के तहत वो छप गई. अब उसके बाद रेवोल्यूशन हुआ, खासे एरिस्टोक्रेट्स जो हैं वो रशिया छोड़ के चले गए. बट द ऑथर एमोर टॉल्स सेज दैट 30% 1/3 of the aristocracy stayed back in Russia and they were persecuted. उनकी बड़ी बड़ी मैंशंस थी तो वो जब्त हो गई, प्रोलेटेरिएट को दे दी गई और उनको अपने ही मैंशन में एक छोटे से कमरे के अंदर उनको रहने की इजाज़त दी. तो इस पोएम की वजह से विच फाउंड फेवर इन द सीनियर हायरार्की ऑफ द सोवियत पार्टी, तो इसको जो है वो फायरिंग स्क्वाड के तहत जो है इसको असैसिनेट, इसको जो है वो मार डालने का नहीं हुक्म दिया गया. ऑन द कॉन्ट्री, जो बड़ा लैविश एक सेंट्रल एक पीस था मॉस्को की हाई सोसाइटी का, विच वॉज द मेट्रोपोल होटल, where the count had been staying for the past 4 years. 4 साल से he was in residence there. वहाँ उसने कहा कि भाई since you like that hotel so much, अब तुम अपनी बाकी ज़िंदगी भी उधर ही गुजारो. And he was left to rot, as it were. So Count साहब ने कहा कि भाई ठीक है यार, if this is how you want to play, these guys want to play it, then fine. So ये सारी कहानी, एंड फॉर द नेक्स्ट 32 years काउंट रोस्टोव aka Sasha spent in the hotel Metropole. 33 years. और ये सारा का सारी किताब जो है, इसके कैरेक्टर्स वगैरह वो सारे मेट्रोपोल होटल में ही रिवॉल्व करते हैं। तो मिश्का के बारे में मैं कह रहा था, बिकॉज मिश्का इज द रीजन द काउंट इज स्टिल अलाइव, उसकी पोएम की वजह से। एंड मिश्का इज अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग कैरेक्टर। तो वो earlier on we get to know that while the Count Rostov was brought up in a 40-room mansion with a retinue of 20 servants, Mishka was brought up, was raised in a two-room apartment by his mother. But ये दोनों जो हैं, they met in the University of St. Petersburg. एंड मिश्का की बात, मिश्का वॉज उसकी एक खसूसियत ये थी कि वॉज वेरी शॉर्ट टेम्पर्ड एंड इट गेट इनटू अ फाइट इन द ड्रॉप ऑफ अ हैट। और काउंट रॉस्टोव साशा की खसूसियत ये थी कि जहाँ उसने देखा कि यार एक बंदा जो है उसके खिलाफ सारी दुनिया खड़ी हुई है, द अंडरडॉग, तो ही वुड रश टू हिज रेस्क्यू। सो इस तरह इनकी बड़ी सही दोस्ती होगी। तो खैर ये है, फिर मैं आपको इसके बारे में बताता रहूँगा। बट अभी जो है, तो एक इनका ट्रेडिशन होता है इनकी फैमिली का, काउंट रॉस्टोव का, कि 10 years आफ्टर द डेथ ऑफ ए फैमिली मेंबर द फैमिली गेट्स टुगेदर एंड रिमेंबर्स हिम, दे टोस्ट हिम। तो मिश्का साहब जो है, ही हैजंट सीन साशा फॉर अ वाइल, एंड बट ही रिमेंबर्स कि ग्रैंड ड्यूक जो थे इनके गॉडफादर साशा के, साशा व्हेन आई से साशा आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट काउंट रॉस्टोव। तो वो ग्रैंड ड्यूक साहब जो हैं उनके 10 साल होने को हैं, ग्रैंड ड्यूक मेडिडेव, उनके 10 साल 10वीं बरसी है। तो ही टर्न्स अप एंड टू shoot the breeze with the count and toast the godfather. So उसके दौरान द कॉन्वर्सेशंस दैट इंस्यू, एक तो जिस तरह ये मिलते हैं ना, क्योंकि ये पहले आया था काउंट से मिलने व्हेन द काउंट वाज स्टेइंग इन his suite, his lavish suite on the 3rd floor, suite 317. But since then, the tribunal has banished him to the 6th floor, जहाँ वो एक छोटा सा सर्वेंट क्वार्टर है, छोटी सी एक खिड़की है जिसकी, वहाँ इसको जो है कहा जी अब यहाँ तुम रहोगे। तो ये साहब जो हैं, मिश्का साहब, he is not aware of this. So when he comes into the hotel, he goes directly to suite 317. और वहाँ the secretary of the ruling party, कॉमराड टारोकोफ्स्की, वो अब ठहरा हुआ है स्वीट 317 में। मिश्का साहब घुस जाता है अंदर, वो कहता है तुम कौन हो? वो मिश्का कहता है तू कौन है? And he's, as I mentioned, he's very short-tempered. So there's this big ruckus. And the count is in the Shalapin bar. Shalapin bar jo hai, wo, that's another sort of, prominent place within the Metropole Hotel. वहाँ काउंट साहब जो हैं वो बैलरीनाज, बॉलशॉय की कुछ बैलरीनाज हैं जो वहाँ आई हुई हैं फॉर अ ड्रिंक, उनके साथ वो फ्लर्ट कर रहे हैं। तो इतने में ये आर्केडी इज द नेम ऑफ द बेल कैप्टन, ही कम्स इन विद अ टेरिबली वरीड एक्सप्रेशन ऑन हिज फेस। साहब वो एक बंदा है, वो सेक्रेटरी के साथ उसका झगड़ा हो रहा है और वो आपका नाम ले रहा है कि वो किधर है, काउंट किधर है, ये तो काउंट का कमरा है और ये कौन इसके अंदर घुसा हुआ है, तो आप आके ज़रा उससे मिल लें। तो ये जाता है और वो देखता है कि हाँ वही है, हिज ओल्ड फ्रेंड मिश्का। एंड मिश्का इज अ ग्रेट पेसर, वो एक जगह बैठ नहीं सकता, ही हैज़ टू पेस, अप एंड डाउन, कितनी भी छोटी जगह हो वो पेसिंग उसने ज़रूर करनी है। तो खैर वो उसके साथ ऊपर जाता है अपने, शोज हिम हिज न्यू क्वार्टर्स, Mishka is very upset, obviously, but he sees that his friend is in good spirits, so that's fine. And they toast the Grand Duke and they remember him. उसकी 10th death anniversary है. और जनाब वाली वो फिर they have, then they have get into their favorite activity of discussing various philosophies and the state of affairs of the world and all the rest of it. So, and if you, I just wanted to spend some time on their discussion in this second episode because it's very interesting. It shows the kind, वो कहता है ना कि जिसको ट्राइब्यूनल इससे पूछती है काउंट से कि भाई तू करता क्या है, कहता है जी मैं कुछ नहीं करता. कहता है what is your occupation? कहते हैं it is not the business of gentlemen to have occupations. I mean that is the attitude of the leisure class. So it's not the business of gentlemen to have occupations. तो वो कहता है okay, then how do you spend your time? कहता है dining, discussing, reading, reflecting, the usual rigmarole. So this is part of that. तो ये कहता है Mishka actually has got himself a job in St. Petersburg, in the University of St. Petersburg, but he has come to Moscow to attend a meeting, a grand conclave of the Russian Association of Proletarian Writers. तो ये एक बड़ा ज़बरदस्त एक लोग इकट्ठे हो रहे हैं और ये कहता है कि जी पहले जहाँ हर एक का अपना अपना एक 1.5 ईंट की मस्जिद थी, अब वो सारे इकट्ठे हो रहे हैं to create a universal poetry, one that doesn't hesitate and needn't kowtow, यानी किसी के आगे हाथ नहीं जोड़नी, one that has the human spirit as its subject and the future as its muse. वाह वाह. तो फिर ये मिश्का साहब जो है ना, मिखाइल फ्योडोरोविच मिंडिच, ये फुल फ्लाइट में, and he's really passionate about his idealism, and the count is very happy to see his friend who's finally found his niche. तो वो उससे कहता है कि they start discussing Thompson, the archaeologists. तो कहता है Thompson divided the ages of man into stone, bronze and iron. Naturally enough, he did so in accordance with the physical tools that defined each epoch. But what of man's spiritual development? What of his moral development? I tell you, they progressed along the very same lines. अब ये मिश्का की अपनी एक सोच है. In the Stone Age, the ideas in the caveman's head were as blunt as the club in his hand. They were as rough as the flint from which he struck a spark. In the age of bronze, when a canny few discovered the science of metallurgy, how long did it take for them to fashion coins, crowns, and swords? That unholy trinity to which the common man was enslaved for the next 1,000 years. तो ये देखें जनाब, coins, crowns, and swords. तो जन, जर और ज़मीन, खैर इसमें वो not quite the same, but yes. फिर ये कहते हैं, then came the age of iron, and with it the steam engine, the printing press, and the gun. Here was a very different trinity indeed. For a while these tools had been developed by the bourgeois to further their own interests. It was through the engine, the press, and the pistol that the proletariat began to free itself from labor, ignorance, and tyranny. Mishka shook his head in appreciation of either history's trajectory or his own turns of phrase. फिर ये कहता है कि, well, my friend, I think we can agree that a new age has begun, the age of steel. We now have the ability to build power stations, skyscrapers, and airplanes. Mishka turned to the Count. You have seen the Sukhov radio towers? Count had not. What a thing of beauty, Sasha! A 200-foot structure of spiraling steel from which we can broadcast the latest news and intelligence. And yes, the sentimental strains of your Tchaikovsky into the home of every citizen within 100 miles. And with each one of these advances, the Russian morality has been keeping step. And then he says, in our time we may witness the end of ignorance, the end of oppression, and the advent of the brotherhood of man. Wah wah. Unfortunately, mass media as we know it today hasn't delivered on any of these fronts in any meaningful way. तो ये सारा साशा साहब सुन रहे हैं. Count Rostov is thrilled. He's ecstatic to find his friend in such great, such great spirits. ये कहते हैं, had the Count overheard such a speech spilling forth from a student in a coffee house, he might have observed with a glint in his eye that apparently it was no longer enough for a poet to write verse. Now a poem must spring from a school with its own manifesto and stake its claim on the moment by means of the first person plural and the future tense, with rhetorical questions and capital letters and an army of exclamation points. And above all, it must be Novaya. Novaya is the new poem, जो एक नया स्पिरिट है. उसके बाद ये एक ऐसी बात करता है जिस पे जो है गौर करने की जरूरत है. But as noted, these would have been the Count's thoughts had he overheard someone else speaking. Hearing the speech spill forth from Misha filled the Count with joy. For it is a fact that a man can be profoundly out of step with his times. A man may have been born in a city famous for its idiosyncratic culture, and yet the very habits, fashions, and ideas that exalt that city in the eyes of the world may make no sense to him at all. As he proceeds through life, he looks about in a state of confusion, understanding neither the inclinations nor the aspirations of his peers. I'm sure many of us have been there. I've been there. And then कहते हैं ना लोग कि यार you've been born before your time. यार, I've heard that once too often. It stopped being funny. फिर ये कहता है कि for such a fellow, forget any chance of romance or professional success. Those are the provenance of men in step with their times. Instead, for this fellow, the options will be to bray like a mule, or find what solace he can from overlooked volumes discovered in overlooked bookshops. And when his roommate stumbles home at 2 a.m, he has little choice but to listen in silent mystification as he is recounted the latest dramas from the city's salons. So, वो क्या कहते हैं कि this had been Mishka's lot for most of his life. And here comes the punchline. But events can unfold in such a manner that overnight the man out of step finds himself in the right place at the right time. सितारे अलाइन कर जाते हैं. The fashions and attitudes that had seemed so alien to him are suddenly swept aside and supplanted by fashions and attitudes in perfect sympathy with his deepest sentiments. Then, like a lone sailor adrift for years on alien seas, he wakes one night to discover familiar constellations overhead. And when this occurs, this extraordinary realignment of the stars, the man so long out of step with his times experiences a supreme lucidity. Suddenly all that has passed comes into focus as a necessary course of events, and all that promises to unfold has the clearest rhyme and reason. वाह यार. तो शराब ये है फलसफा. और मिंडिच साहब जो हैं, he is now on cloud 9. or is it cloud 10? But अब यही है कि things change. Change is the only constant. And we'll be back with more in the next issue. So from TCS Octara WebMall Plus and Readers Club, thank you very much. Until we meet again. Allah Hafiz.